Let's begin here, because many still believe that strength is measured by how much noise you make. They think freedom comes from shouting your truth, proving yourself, or persuading others to agree. But real strength is quieter. It shows itself in what you no longer carry. It lives in the weight you put down without announcing it. A woman or a man who has found their center does not beg for understanding. They do not explain their every choice. Their presence itself tells the story. And in silence, the unnecessary finally falls away. Before I continue, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And if reflections like this resonate, don't forget to like and subscribe. What we are speaking of is a quiet cleansing, removing the people roles and habits that once helped us survive but now hold us back. Jung called this the tension between the persona and the self. The persona is the mask, the smile worn when you want to cry the role played to earn approval. But behind it waits the authentic self weary from pretending. Many live half their lives in this mask, mistaking survival for freedom. Notice how the body tightens when you keep explaining yourself. Notice how your energy drains when you play a part that is no longer yours. This is the soul's signal that something false has overstayed its welcome. The shadow often rises here too. The hidden anger, the secret fear, the shame of not being enough. We try to suppress it, but repression only deepens the exhaustion. The first step in any true transformation is recognizing this inner weight, the burden of roles that don't belong to you, the habits that dim your vitality, the memories you clutch like chains. All of these keep you from the stillness that heals. To set them down is not to abandon your duty, but to return to the truth of who you are. Jung wrote that individuation is the process of becoming whole, and wholeness is never loud. It does not demand permission. It comes quietly, like dawn breaking through the night. It begins the moment you decide you no longer need to carry what is false. So this is where we begin our journey, not with noise or struggle, but with silence, with the gentle act of letting go, with the quiet courage to remove what weakens you and to walk lighter, closer to yourself. When the silence first settles in, there is often unease. The old ways, though heavy, feel familiar. The roles you played, the habits you repeated, the chains you carried, they became part of your identity. Letting them go feels like standing at the edge of a cliff, uncertain if you can trust the ground beneath you. And yet, this is where the first fracture appears, the moment when what once protected you begins to suffocate you. Think of how often a woman or a man has smiled when the heart longed to cry. How often one agreed when the soul wanted to resist. This is the cage of the persona. Jung described the persona as the mask we wear to meet society's expectations. It is useful, yes, but when clung to for too long, it becomes a prison. The fracture comes when you realize that the face you show no longer matches the truth within. This inner split deepens when procrastination takes root. You know the step you must take, yet you delay. You sense the conversation you need to have, yet you wait. Every postponed action is a small betrayal of the self. The days pass, and with them, a quiet erosion of vitality. Jung warned that what we do not make conscious appears in our lives as fate. Delay is one form of unconsciousness. It allows fear to govern what should be guided by choice. Then comes the weight of the past, memories that no longer live except in the mind. Disappointments, replayed mistakes, rehearsed wounds, revisited. They bind tighter than chains because they are invisible, and yet they shape how we move, how we see, how we love. Many people confuse these memories for identity, saying, "This is who I am." But the truth is otherwise. The past is not the self. It is only the path that led you here. The fracture is felt when you realize you are dragging shadows that no longer belong in your present life. This is not only a mental burden, but a spiritual one. To pretend, to delay, to cling, each draws you further from the center of your being. Each day lived in falsehood or hesitation chips away at your sense of freedom. And yet the crack in the surface is necessary. Without it, no light could enter. Without it, the deeper self could not stir awake. It is here that resentment begins to whisper. You notice it when you look at the life you have built and feel both pride and bitterness. You worked, you gave, you tried, and still you carry anger at what was withheld or what was lost. Resentment is the most subtle fracture because it wears the mask of justice. You believe you are simply remembering what is owed, but in truth, it is a poison drunk, daily corroding the very vessel that carries it. And then there is the endless justification. How often do you explain your choices to people who never intended to understand? How many times have you sought permission to simply be who you are? Each explanation chips away at conviction until you no longer know whether you are living for yourself or for their approval. This is the fracture of identity when you no longer belong fully to your own soul. At this stage, the shadow is restless. It appears in small ways: a sudden burst of anger, a heaviness in the chest, a night of sleepless worry. These are not signs of weakness, but signals of division. They reveal that your inner life has outgrown the mask you built. The fracture cannot be ignored, for it is the beginning of awakening. It is important to understand this fracture is not failure. It is the first necessary step in individuation. The mask must crack for the self to emerge. The old habits must feel unbearable before they can be released. The chain must be felt before it can be broken. What you sense now, the heaviness, the fatigue, the quiet dissatisfaction, is not the end, but the sign that a deeper transformation is waiting. And so the first fracture is not meant to destroy you. It is meant to call you inward, to show you that the role you invented, the delays you excused, the memories you clung to, the justifications you gave, none of these define who you truly are. They are fragments, not essence. And when they finally break, they reveal the opening through which the self may begin to breathe. When the mask begins to crack, the world inside does not grow quiet. Instead, it grows louder. The persona tries to hold its shape, but the shadow presses from beneath. One part of you wants to continue smiling, explaining, and pleasing. Another part aches with anger, fear, and exhaustion. This is the deep tension of the soul, and it cannot be ignored. The persona was once useful. It helped you earn respect, keep the peace, and survive difficult seasons of life. But it asks for too much. It demands silence when you need to speak. It demands agreement when you long to resist. The shadow carries everything the persona refuses to acknowledge: the hidden resentment, the secret grief, the buried anger. Together, they create a restless storm, one side polished and agreeable, the other raw and unfiltered. Many people fear the shadow because it feels dark, dangerous, even shameful. But Jung reminded us that the shadow is not only negative, it contains hidden strengths, forgotten talents, and truths we have been too afraid to live. To reject it completely is to reject half of the self. And so the battle begins, not against the shadow, but between two halves of the same soul. This struggle shows itself in daily life. One moment you are kind and accommodating, the next you feel bitter and depleted. One moment you present composure, the next you collapse in private. You may notice yourself criticizing others sharply, not realizing you are seeing in them the very flaws you avoid within. Projection is the shadow's way of asking to be seen. Each harsh judgment of the outer world is a mirror reflecting what waits inside. Emotional dependency grows here too. When you are divided, you look outward for rescue. You expect another person to fill what feels missing, to soothe the unrest, to complete what you secretly fear is broken. But dependence only deepens the split, because no one outside can resolve the war between mask and shadow. True connection can only be born from two whole beings, not from two halves leaning desperately on each other. Fear also multiplies in this space. The mind races ahead, imagining every possible failure, every loss, every rejection. Night after night, you live through catastrophes that never come, exhausting yourself with visions that belong only to fantasy. This is the shadow of anxiety born from trying to control what lies beyond your grasp. The persona tells you to appear calm, but inside the body keeps the score of imagined storms. Resentment lingers, too poisoning what joy you do have. It whispers, "Look how they wronged you. Look what they withheld. Look what you never received." Yet resentment ties you more to the past than to the present. It becomes a chain, binding you to those you wish to be free of. And the persona, eager to maintain composure, keeps you silent while the shadow burns quietly beneath. Even self-criticism becomes a weapon in this struggle. When you constantly explain yourself, defend your worth, or doubt your choices, you strengthen the mask and suppress the self. Each explanation is a small surrender to others' judgment. Each harsh inner voice silences the deeper truth that you are already enough. The cost of this hidden war is immense. Energy is drained. Peace becomes distant. Relationships suffer under the weight of contradictions. You begin to feel half alive, as though a part of your essence has been locked away. And in a sense, it has. The persona guards the door, while the shadow waits behind it, pressing harder each day to be seen. But this is not meant as punishment. It is meant as invitation. The tension between persona and shadow is the birthplace of growth. Without it, you would remain asleep in a role too small for your soul. With it, you are forced to ask, who am I when the mask falls? What waits in the darkness that I have not yet faced? The shadow, when approached with honesty, becomes a guide. It shows you what you truly feel, even if it is uncomfortable. It reminds you of your hidden power, even if it comes disguised as anger. It calls you back to wholeness, insisting that you can no longer live divided. Jung wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. To meet the shadow is to begin this work. The struggle is not easy. It feels like being pulled in two directions at once, one toward approval, the other toward authenticity. Yet the deeper self knows that peace lies not in choosing one and discarding the other, but in integration. To bring the shadow into awareness without shame. To let the persona soften so that it serves rather than controls. This is the heart of the third stage, a conflict that cannot be bypassed, a tension that must be endured. But within it lies the possibility of real transformation. For when you see both mask and shadow clearly, you stand at the threshold of becoming whole. Every conflict carries within it the seed of awakening. When the persona grows thin and the shadow grows restless, something in the soul begins to stir. It is not always dramatic. Often it begins as a quiet recognition, a soft light appearing at the edges of long darkness. What seemed like weakness reveals itself as a summons. What once felt like failure becomes a threshold. This is the moment when a person realizes that peace cannot be found by rearranging the outer world. No amount of approval, attention, or control will resolve the unease within. The true work begins inward, where the self has been waiting all along. Jung called this the path of individuation, the movement away from roles and masks toward integration and wholeness. It is not about becoming someone new, but about remembering the deeper truth of who you have always been. At first, the awakening feels fragile. The old habits still tempt, the old wounds still call. Yet in the stillness, a different voice emerges. It is softer than the noise of fear, but stronger than the clamor of doubt. It whispers that you are not incomplete, not broken, not dependent on another to feel whole. This is the sound of the self, long hidden behind layers of conditioning. Forgiveness often enters here not as sentiment, but as liberation. To forgive does not mean to forget or excuse. It means to stop carrying what is already gone. It is to release yourself from being defined by old injuries. The burden of resentment, heavy as iron, begins to lift when you decide that the past no longer deserves to shape the present. In that release, you step closer to freedom. Clarity also begins to grow. Instead of imagining endless catastrophes, you discover the strength to meet life as it comes. Anxiety loses its grip when you recognize that most of what you feared never arrives. And even when storms do appear, you are capable of weathering them. The mind learns to observe thoughts without obeying every one. Trust shifts away from prediction toward adaptability. Life becomes less about control and more about presence. Self-observation replaces constant criticism. Instead of pointing outward, you begin to turn inward with honesty. At first, this can feel uncomfortable. Yet true growth begins only when you look at yourself with both courage and compassion. Criticism of others fades when you realize it was a mirror of your own unrest. By watching your patterns with sincerity, you open the door to change without shame. This awakening is not only psychological, but deeply symbolic. It is as though the house of the soul has been long neglected, its rooms filled with clutter, its windows shut against the light. Now, step by step, you begin to open those windows. You clear the dust, you release what no longer belongs, and you allow fresh air to flow in. This inner cleansing is the beginning of individuation, the house becoming a true home again. Here, the shadow shifts as well. What once frightened you becomes a source of guidance. The anger you feared reveals your boundaries. The grief you hid uncovers your depth of love. The anxiety you carried teaches you about control and surrender. By listening instead of repressing, you discover that the shadow was never your enemy, but a neglected teacher. Integration begins when you welcome these parts back into the circle of the self. With this awakening comes a new understanding of love. Love is no longer about dependence, about needing another to complete you. Instead, it flows from fullness. Two whole people meet, not to fix each other, but to walk together in freedom. You see that the deepest bond is born from presence, not from fear of being alone. The awakening is also a reordering of time. Happiness is no longer chased as a destination far ahead. It is discovered here in the breath you take and the simple act of living with awareness. The illusion of someday fades, replaced by the richness of this moment. Jung often spoke of the importance of symbols, and this shift in time is itself symbolic. It marks the soul's return to the eternal present, the only place where life truly unfolds. This stage is not without difficulty. The old persona still whispers. The habits of fear and resentment return at times. But now, you recognize them for what they are. Echoes of an old self, not commands you must obey. Each time you choose presence over fear, forgiveness over resentment, self-observation over criticism, you strengthen the new foundation being laid. Awakening is not a sudden blaze that burns away all shadows at once. It is more like dawn, slow and gradual, yet unstoppable. The light grows, the outlines of truth emerge, and the night retreats. What once was hidden is now seen. What once controlled you is now understood, and in that understanding it loses its power. This is the turning point in the journey. The fracture no longer feels like breaking, but like opening. The shadow no longer feels like a threat, but like a companion leading you deeper. The persona softens, allowing more of the self to shine through. The path of individuation has begun in earnest. And from this awakening comes a new orientation to life. You are no longer driven by fear of rejection, by the hunger for approval, or by the weight of the past. You are guided instead by an inner compass, subtle but sure. The self is no longer hidden. It has become your North Star. Awakening alone is not enough. To sense the truth is one thing. To live it is another. At some point, recognition must become action. A boundary must be drawn. A choice must be made. The self does not emerge only through reflection, but through the steady practice of alignment, the quiet decision to live in truth rather than illusion. This is the turning of the wheel. The persona once unquestioned is set aside. The shadow once feared is welcomed into awareness. And now, with both in view, the individual begins to act from the wholeness of the self. Jung reminded us that individuation is not a theory, but a lived reality. It requires courage to say yes to what nourishes you and no to what depletes you, even when others do not understand. Boundaries are not walls of anger. They are lines of clarity. When you stop justifying yourself, you stop handing others the power to define your worth. When you refuse to live in resentment, you free your heart to move lightly. When you end the habit of constant criticism, you create space for compassion and honest self-observation. These boundaries are not punishments to the world, but gifts to the self, the foundations of inner order. Discipline plays a vital role here. The body cannot be ignored while the soul awakens. To strengthen the mind while neglecting the body is to leave the house half in ruin. Every small act of care rising early, nourishing yourself wisely, setting aside distractions, creating silence is an anchor for transformation. Toxic habits fall away not through guilt, but through steady practice. And each time you choose life-giving routines over destructive ones, you plant seeds for the self to flourish. In this stage, relationships also change. Emotional dependency dissolves as you recognize your own completeness. Love is redefined not as rescue, but as companionship. A woman who knows her value does not collapse when another departs. A man who respects his own depths does not beg for constant reassurance. Boundaries make love freer because they shift it from need to choice. There is also a new relationship to time. Procrastination is replaced by presence. You no longer delay your becoming by waiting for the perfect moment. You act today, however imperfectly, because today is the only soil in which transformation grows. The decision to begin outweighs the illusion of waiting until you are ready. And in each small action, the self learns trust in its own strength. At first, these boundaries may feel harsh. Saying no to old patterns feels like betrayal of comfort. Refusing to justify yourself feels like defiance. But as you hold to these lines, you notice something subtle. Your energy returns. The exhaustion of carrying too much begins to ease. And with each choice, you affirm silently, "My life belongs to me." The shadow continues to whisper, but now it is heard differently. Anger is understood as the voice of a boundary crossed. Fear is seen as the call to prepare rather than to freeze. Grief is honored as proof of deep love. Integration means these voices no longer control from the dark, but speak openly in the light of awareness. The persona, too, softens into service. Instead of being a mask, it becomes a tool, a way of engaging the world without losing the self. Transformation is never about perfection. It is about direction. Each act of clarity moves you one step closer to authenticity. Each decision to let go of what weakens you brings you nearer to wholeness. Jung taught that wholeness is not achieved by cutting away parts of ourselves, but by uniting them. Boundaries are the structure that allows this union to hold. Without them, the self dissolves back into confusion. With them, It stands steady like a tree rooted in deep soil. There is a sacred simplicity in this stage. No dramatic gestures are required. You do not need to announce your boundaries to the world, nor demand recognition for your discipline. The transformation speaks in silence. People may sense it in your calm. They may feel it in your absence from old conflicts. They may notice that you are no longer available for roles that once consumed you. The change does not need to be explained because it radiates naturally. The cost of transformation is real. You may lose certain relationships. You may step away from familiar roles. You may discover that some will resist your new clarity, preferring the mask you wore before. But the gain is greater. What is lost are attachments to falsehood. What is gained is alignment with truth. The self cannot grow if it is forever bound to what diminishes it. In this way, choice becomes the alchemy of the soul. What was once heavy becomes light. What was once hidden becomes revealed. What was once scattered becomes whole. And the path forward, though still uncertain, feels clearer than before. You are no longer pulled by every demand or fear. You walk with intention guided by the compass of the self. This is the essence of transformation. Not noise, not spectacle, but the steady courage to live differently. To act on what you know, rather than on what others expect. To release what harms and embrace what strengthens. To set boundaries, not against life, but in service of it. And through these choices, the self continues to rise. Every journey of transformation eventually arrives at stillness. After the fractures, the shadows, the awakenings, and the choices, something begins to settle inside. The noise grows softer. The burdens feel lighter. What once demanded endless energy now no longer controls you. This is the gift of integration, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of inner peace. The self has always been there, quietly waiting beneath the masks and wounds. What changes is not who you are, but how much of your true nature you allow to breathe. When you finally release the weight of resentment, fear, and endless justifications, you discover a freedom that cannot be taken away. It is the freedom of belonging to yourself. Jung wrote that individuation is the process of becoming whole, and wholeness is never loud. It is not about applause or recognition. It is about standing quietly in your own truth, even when no one notices. It is about being loyal to the self rather than to the roles others expect you to play. This wholeness is not perfection. It is not the erasure of all flaws or fears. It is the weaving together of every part of you, the light and the shadow, the wounds and the strengths, the child you once were, and the soul you are becoming. When these fragments come together, the soul feels at home again. The symbols of this journey are simple yet profound. The mask softens, no longer a prison, but a tool. The shadow steps forward, not as enemy, but as teacher. The house of the soul is opened, its windows cleared, its air renewed. And dawn rises within, revealing that the darkness was never absolute. It was always preparing the way for light. You no longer chase happiness as a distant goal. You no longer wait for permission to be yourself. You live here in this moment with clarity and calm. And from this place, life becomes less of a burden and more of a gift. Even ordinary days feel sacred when they are lived in alignment with the self. The lesson is simple, yet it takes a lifetime to embody. You do not need to carry what does not belong to you. You do not need to wear the mask forever. You do not need to silence the shadow. Wholeness begins the moment you honor every part of yourself, set boundaries with love, and walk in the quiet strength of authenticity. And so we return to where we began, silence. The silence of letting go. The silence of refusing to explain, the silence of becoming whole. It is not an empty silence, but a full one, filled with presence, filled with truth, filled with peace. In that silence, you find your true freedom. As you reflect on this journey, ask yourself gently, what is ready to be released? What old mask no longer fits? What forgotten strength is waiting in the shadows? These questions do not demand quick answers. They are companions for the path ahead. For in the end, transformation is not a single moment, but a way of living. Each day offers a choice to fall back into old patterns or to walk in the direction of wholeness. Each day is a chance to practice individuation, not as an idea, but as the quiet art of becoming yourself. And perhaps this is the deepest truth. When you live from the self, you become not only free, but luminous. Others may not know why they feel it, but they will sense your calm. They will notice your absence from petty struggles. They will feel the strength of your boundaries and the warmth of your presence. You will no longer need to convince or explain. Your life itself will speak. This is the invitation of individuation. To become whole. To live lightly. To walk with both shadow and light. To stand in your truth, not with noise, but with stillness. And now, as we close this reflection, I will leave you with a final image. Imagine standing before a mirror at dawn. Behind you lies the long night of masks and fears. Before you, a new day is breaking. In the mirror, you see not the persona, not the shadow, but the whole self quiet, steady, and free. That is who you are. That is who you have always been. Take this with you, not as theory, but as practice. Let it shape how you breathe, how you speak, how you choose. And if these words have spoken to your soul, share your own reflections below. Tell us what part of this journey has touched you most. Your voice may be the light someone else is waiting to see.